Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Monday Night MarshStream. I'm David, and I'll be your host tonight. And welcome to our Works in Progress evening here at Monday Night Marsh. So thanks for being here. Um, we've got programming going on just about every night of the week here on the MarshStream. We provide our programming for you free. So if you can support us with a donation through our tip jar, there is a link in the chat. Welcome to everyone who is watching on YouTube Live. Um, just to let you know some of the stuff going on here on the March stream this week, we have our Wildcard Tuesday series. Tomorrow night it's Healing from Within. It's a kind of music and guided meditation program that we do about once a month, led by Valerie Jew. Wednesday night is soloarts Heal. Host Gail Schickley will be welcoming performer Sam Simon. Say hello to my cat here. soloarts Heal on Wednesday is performer Sam Simon, who will be doing excerpts from his show, The Actual Dance. It's about caretaking and cancer recovery. It was one of the big hits of our MarshStream International Solo Fest this past fall. That's on Wednesday night. Thursday night, Stephanie's MarshStream, the interview show run by our founder and artistic director, Stephanie Wiseman. She will be interviewing performer Daryl Van Leer, who will be the featured performer on our Solo Performer Spotlight this weekend. Friday afternoon at noon is CJ's Fitness Sing. It's a combination singing lesson and fitness class run by Candace Johnson, a voice professor at Cal. She's a wonderful performer and a wonderful teacher, and so check it out at noon. Friday night is Bingo with Josh Kornbluth. It's part improv comedy, Josh's little stories, and just a lot of fun back and forth with the community there. That's Fridays at 7:30. And then this weekend, Solo Performer Spotlight is performer Daryl Van Leer with his show Mandela Let Freedom Reign. That's Saturday night at 7:30. We've got dozens of shows on our YouTube channel, so check it out and subscribe. Lots of great performance there. But that is enough from me. So tonight we are very happy to welcome a returning performer, veteran Monday night performer, Scott Knaster, who's performing a new work, and he wants you to know that a lot of this is brand new, so he's going to be working from notes a little bit, but he's all jazzed up and ready to go, and so are we. So forgive me here, because I am also acting as stage manager here, and welcome our solo feature, Scott Knaster, with his piece Adjacent to Greatness.
I grew up in a normal suburban place, and then I went to Silicon Valley. I was what you call an indoor kid. I lived on TV and comic books, and I loved science fiction, and maybe I had some bologna sandwiches in there too, but mainly the TV and the comic books. And the best part of science fiction were the computers. Like Colossus, the Forbin Project, was a great computer when I was a kid in the movies that, well, I won't spoil it for you, but it's a really good one. Then suddenly, when I was a teenager, somebody invented home computers. You could have a computer at home. And this blew my mind, and I really needed to have one. So I took literally every penny of savings that I had, which, it wasn't all that much because I was an 18-year-old college dropout, but I took all my money and bought an Apple II computer. This was not a normal thing for a teenager to do, even back in the 70s. Even my mom said, "Scotty, buy a stereo." She thought it would come to no good, and maybe she was right, but I wanted a computer. And the computer took over my life in a good way. I would sit in my bedroom, which was in my parents' basement, of course, and I had it connected to my TV set because I couldn't afford a real monitor. And I would just play with it day and night. And I would explore it because I had spent every penny of my savings on it. And I really kind of demanded to know everything about it because I'd invested so much money and time in it. So I really didn't do much of anything else. And pretty soon I started to learn a lot about this computer. And what could you do with a computer in the 70s? Oh, just about anything. You could do math, lots of fast, really good math. You could make music from the computer. That was very cool. You could put color graphics on the screen. That was incredible because I wasn't an artist and I didn't know how to play music, but with my computer, I could do those things. It was magic. And this was the magic spellbook, the Apple II reference manual, which I read every page of multiple times. It had all the spells inside, like 3D0G was one of my favorites, and also call -151. And another great one was 6 Control P. And I knew them all, and if I forgot, I could look them up in the magic book. So inevitably, I got a job at a computer store. What else could I do? Like I said, I dropped out of college. I was a great salesman at the computer store. I had no idea what selling anything was like, but I was just so excited and so much in love with this computer and the whole idea of computers that I guess it was easy for me to sell them to people who came into the store. I loved what I was selling, and I guess I made the other people interested enough to buy their computers too. And in time, I came to really love the company, not the store where I worked, but Apple Computer. And I would read about Apple in the computer magazines of the time, and I would invent this dreamy notion of what Apple was like, that it was filled with these genius hippies out in California that were inventing this incredible new technology that was going to change the world. And they were crazy and they were geniuses. And I had never met any of them, but I knew some of their names from reading the books and magazines. Of course, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, but also people who weren't quite so well known, like Andy Hertzfeld or Alan Baum or Charlie Kellner. And I didn't know who they were, but I sort of invented who they all were in my mind. They became my heroes, even though I hadn't met them. And at 22 years old, I was sure I had to go to California and work for Apple Computer. Didn't know how that would happen exactly, but I knew I had to do it. So I left the real world behind and went to the fantasy world of Silicon Valley. I felt really like an immigrant. And first thing I did when I got there was I drove around the valley and I just looked at all the buildings of all the companies, the computer companies that I had been a customer and a fan of, like the Verbatim Disk Company and the VisiCorp software company and Commodore that made computers that weren't as good as Apple's computers, I knew. And eventually I got to where my new job was at Apple, and I had it all pictured in my mind. There would be this tall glass building and a sign with a giant Apple logo on it, like 200 feet high and rotating. And it would be so great when I got there. And when I actually did get there, I saw this, which again blew my mind. This ordinary building with a really nice, simple, homey wooden sign out front with that incredible, iconic, gorgeous logo. That was where I was going. That was Apple. And I guess I was disappointed that they didn't have the 200-foot rotating neon sign and the glass skyscraper, but I kind of reset my expectations and I thought, are there really people in that building doing these incredible things? Is that where they work? Well, yes, they were. They really did work in there. Now, my job was called technical writer. I didn't know what one was before, but then I became one. A technical writer is someone who writes books and online material to help people with computers. So at first I was writing these books for developers who wanted to make software for Apple computers. Like, here's one that I wrote called How to Write Macintosh Software, very modestly, narrowly focused title. And that was fun. And I got to meet a lot of Apple's developers that way and really learned a lot about how the computers worked and what it was like to write a book also, which is, the answer is grueling. So I also wrote online help, like to go with programs so that if you needed to know how something worked, you might look it up. And if you've ever looked up help for how something works and you want to know, you need to know how to do something in a program and you got a really terrible article, I didn't write that one. Mine were good. I wrote good ones. So remember that the next time you're using online help with some software. Now, the great thing about being at Apple in this era was the people that I got to work with, like some of the people I mentioned before and more. And it was amazing to me that they were literally transforming and changing the world with their work as computers were brought to more and more people. And I was just sort of in there writing about what they did, or maybe I would give a demonstration or teach a class. And I felt like there's this greatness going on around me that I get to be a part of because I'm there. And as my career progressed, I was really lucky to get to run into this greatness over and over again. Like at Apple, the people who invented the Mac, which basically defined the way computers have been working for like 40 years now. And then later at a company called General Magic, much less well known than Apple, which is often known as the most important dead company in Silicon Valley, because at General Magic, they invented the smartphone 15 years too early, like way too early, because a lot of things weren't ready yet. I got to be there. I was lucky enough to be a writer there. And I also spent time at some other big companies and some other fun projects. And I realized all this greatness is going on around me. And there I am, adjacent to greatness. Now, the Grateful Dead were the most successful touring band in the history of rock and roll. Apple Computer, at this time, was the 292nd most successful company in America. So, Grateful Dead, Apple Computer, pretty good. Not as impressive. My boss at Apple was this real character named Guy Kawasaki. Many of you have probably heard of him. He's written a bunch of books about business. He speaks a lot and is a kind of a business leader and has been for the past 30 years or so. More than that. Guy happened to meet someone named Betsy Cohen, who was the physicist to the Grateful Dead. Yes, the Grateful Dead had a physicist. I think it had something to do with sound physics, but I think it's just cool to say physicist to the Grateful Dead. Guy got the idea that maybe we could get the Grateful Dead to come to Apple and put on a little private concert just for us. Sounded good to me. Guy was not a deadhead, so he kind of gave this task to me. He said, you know, call up Betsy Cohen, because we called people up on the phone in those days, and get the Grateful Dead to come here and, you know, we'll give them some Macintoshes or something. So I called up Betsy on the phone and I proposed this to her. And she said, they don't do bar mitzvahs. And I think what she meant was, they don't do little shows. They're the Grateful Dead. They don't do like these little on-command shows for a few computers or something like that. So we talked some more. And we finally decided that they would come to give a presentation. And we would send them some computers in exchange. And they wouldn't be responsible for playing a concert, but they would sit on a stage and talk to people. That sounded okay. That sounded pretty cool. I guess now that I think of it, it was sort of a TED Talk. And I was going to say we invented TED Talks, but TED Talks actually started a couple years before. So we didn't invent TED Talks, even accidentally. So now we have the Grateful Dead coming to Apple Computer, and I'm in charge. And I have no idea what I'm doing, which is pretty typical of both me and Apple Computer in those days. We had them at this little 400-seat auditorium in one of the buildings. So it occurred to us belatedly that we might have a lot of people wanting to come see the Grateful Dead speak. And we had a 400-seat auditorium and no security plan and no crowd control plan. So my plan was, let's not tell anybody about it. Good plan, huh? And that way, a mob won't show up, but somehow the right people will magically show up. Somehow, my bosses approved this plan, or maybe I didn't tell them, I don't remember. But that was the plan. So the day of the talk, nobody seemed to know about it. Like all the deadheads at Apple, and nobody knew the Grateful Dead was coming to their building to speak. So I ran around frantically to the building, putting up posters that I just made and telling people, hey, come see the Grateful Dead are going to talk. And we got the little auditorium about half full. I guess we didn't have a mob scene, so that's a win, but maybe not the best idea not to tell anybody about it. I put my friend and coworker, Cameron Burse, in charge of hosting the Grateful Dead. This was great because Cameron is a huge Deadhead. And so I don't think he thought that his job at Apple Computer would get him to meet the Grateful Dead, but there we were. Bob Weir and John Perry Barlow from the band showed up and went to give their little speech in the auditorium. They told us that they had been working on a song using the Macs. And this was really a big deal because nobody made music with a Mac in this day. It was, by the way, this was like 1986. There was no software for it. So this was really pioneering on their part. And they're telling the story, and Barlow's telling us about the song. And then he said, last night before we came here, the Mac crashed and we lost the song. We don't have the song anymore. And you could hear an audible sigh from the half full auditorium. Oh, because not only had the world lost a Grateful Dead song, but it was our fault. A Macintosh had crashed and taken down a Grateful Dead song. What a loss for the universe. But then Barlow had kind of left the stage and he kind of went back and he said, I have to tell you, I actually made that story up. We didn't do anything creative with the Macs. We mostly just played games with them. Oh, and the accounting department used them. But we like them, we think they're cool. And see, I was telling you that other story and I suddenly realized this room is full of deadheads. I didn't expect that. It's bad karma to lie to the deadheads. And lying to deadheads about this would be like drowning puppies. Wow. So afterwards, I was talking to Barlow. He said he never knew it before, but the Mac made him figure out that he was a computer nerd, his term. And Barlow has lots of interests besides writing songs. He's very interested in privacy, in free expression, in government. And this interest led to his co-founding something called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF. For those who don't know EFF, it's probably the most important such organization in the world about the digital frontier, freedom of expression on the internet, and has done a ton of work in the decades since it's been founded. And Barlow, bless him, one time wrote that the EFF would not have started if I hadn't sent him those computers. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true, but I still put it on my resume. meeting rooms. Last year, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of techies stopped going to the office. But they didn't stop having meetings. They just stopped going to the meeting rooms. Tech companies are filled with meeting rooms. They're experts in meeting technology. Zoom and 10 other kinds of things like Microsoft Teams and Google Meet and FaceTime. And this is how, and WebEx, and I mean, now everybody knows them all. This is how business is done in technical firms especially. And everybody's calendar is filled with these meetings, wall-to-wall meetings. Some people have 2 meetings and 3 meetings booked at the same time. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they have time to get anything else done, let alone go to 3 meetings at once. So it's a problem, and Silicon Valley tries to solve the problem. Here's a great idea. Let's have a day of no meetings, no meeting Thursday. Never have a meeting on a Thursday, ever. So that lasts for a couple weeks, and then somebody needs to meet with you. And they look at your calendar and you're triple booked all week except on Thursday. Oh, okay, I know we're not supposed to have meetings on Thursday, but let me just, this one time I'll book a meeting on Thursday. And then pretty soon, Thursday's filled up again, and now it's no meeting Wednesday. So that doesn't work out too well. Here's another solution that doesn't work or has nothing to do with the problem. Let's have some fun with it. Let's name the conference rooms. Let's give the conference rooms clever, fun names so that people won't notice their lives are passing by while they go to these meetings. So like instead of just room 142, let's name the conference rooms in this building after astronauts. Or how about naming them after birds or Star Trek characters? Or maybe science fiction things. Here's a real conference room map where everything's named after science fiction things. That's fun. Here's one where everything is named after punctuation marks. That's really great. There's a conference room, there's a floor where the conference rooms are all named after state parks in Minnesota. How great is that? When that happens, that means you have too many conference rooms and too many buildings. Then somebody gets the clever idea of naming a conference room the other room. So you're meeting in the other room and everybody's confused and nobody gets there. Or you're meeting in not this room. Oh, not this room. Well then, which room? Ha ha, very funny, no meeting. Or my favorite is when they have a room called the small room on the 3rd floor and it's the big room on the 4th floor. So that's another clever, fun thing that doesn't solve anything. And it's funny maybe once. Now, then there's one thing that happened to me a few years ago that's conference room related. I got invited to a meeting with a VP of the company in a room, in a building I wasn't familiar with. And I didn't know what the meeting was about, which is fairly typical too in a big company. Somebody says, come to this meeting, and depending on who it is, you go or you ask what they want. I just went over there. And the meeting room was called Kepler's Laws of Planetary Motion, because all the names were scientific in this building. And I got there and I sat and I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Other person didn't show up. Finally, he pinged me and said, where are you? I'm in the conference room. No, I'm in the conference room. No, you're not, because I'm in Kepler's Laws of Planetary Motion. Where are you? Oh, I'm in Newton's Laws of Physical Motion in an entirely different building. And we never did get together. And I don't even know what he wanted. But hey, it's fun. And now I'm waiting for Steve Jobs. How did I get here? Well, Apple launched the Mac and it didn't do very well. In fact, we had a little graph of sales that looked like the Mac was going out of business. And that was bad. And it kind of reflected on Steve Jobs. And eventually Steve Jobs was pushed out of his own company. Despite all the genius and all the effort of the team, including Steve and Andy Hertzfeld and Bill Atkinson, who put that computer together with years of heart and their souls. It wasn't successful. Steve left, and after a while, he started a new company called Next. He had a few people from Apple, just a few people, and Apple was kind of concerned about Next. Apple sued Next. Big giant Apple, little bitty Next. Steve said, it's hard to think that $1 billion company can't compete with 6 people in blue jeans. They wouldn't say what they were doing at Next. Nowadays, we would say they were in stealth mode. I don't think we had that term back then. They wouldn't say what they were doing, so guess what? Everybody wanted to know what they were doing. It's brilliant, as we've learned now. And everybody wanted to work there because we wanted to know what they were doing and we wanted to help them do it, whatever the heck it was. I wanted to work there. I knew some people, so I got an interview there. The interview was the standard Silicon Valley all-day interview. 6, 7, 8 people all in a row. And if you did okay, the last interview was Steve Jobs. So I guess I was doing okay. And every person who interviewed me, I would say, so what are you making? And I think at the time they had said they were making a powerful computer. But I wanted more details and nobody would tell me. But everybody said the same thing. You have to take a leap of faith. That was the way to get past the fact that you couldn't know what they were actually doing. Okay, you had to take a leap of faith. Finally, the end of the day, 5 o'clock, I get to meet with Steve Jobs. So I guess I'm doing okay until now. So I'm waiting for Steve Jobs. And then he walks into the room. I have never met him. I worked at Apple when he was there, but Apple was a big company and he wasn't there very long when I was there. He comes in the room, he sits down, and he opens with this. Are you the best technical writer in the world? And me, like an idiot, I say, no. And he says, okay, who is? I said, well, that's my friend, Caroline Rose. She already works here. She's the best in the world. He says, okay. Are you the second best technical writer in the world? And now I'm catching on. I'm slow, but I figured out what's happening here. I said, sure, yes, I am the second best technical writer in the world. And he's satisfied with that. And we talk and we do okay, or I do okay, I guess. And we get toward the part where I think he's starting to sell me on the company. And I ask him what I've asked everybody else. Can you tell me a little about what you're making? And he says, we really can't. We really have to keep it a secret, but I can show you something. And he goes to the door and he opens the door and he yells to somebody to get something. And he comes back with a little chip, an integrated circuit. And he hands it to me and he says, this is the level of work that we're doing here. Now, I don't know anything about chips. I don't know anything about hardware. I looked at it, I put it in my hand. I think I even held it up to my ear and shook it. I didn't know what it was. It could have been a toy. It could have been something that they got at Radio Shack and he's messing with me. Or it could have been the greatest innovation to come out of Silicon Valley to that date. I didn't know. And I said to him, I really don't know what this is. And he said, you just have to take a leap of faith. The next day, FedEx, I got an offer letter from Next for the job. Yes, I have the offer letter. And on the bottom is the signature line. I accept this insanely great offer. But I couldn't accept the offer. I couldn't make that leap of faith. And I think the reason is I didn't know who Steve Jobs was. I didn't understand. I thought he was a brilliant guy who started an amazing company and then left, and that he was done. And I didn't really figure his visionary abilities. And of course, no one could see the future. I didn't know what the future held for him. And I just didn't see it in Next. I thought Next would be something not interesting. So I said no. And I called the hiring manager and I said no. And he said, okay, you have to understand Steve is going to call you. So get ready for that. And I wasn't sure what that meant, but I said, okay. And then like 2 minutes later, the phone rang and I picked up the phone because we picked up phones like that in those days. And it was Steve Jobs. And he said, I hear you don't want to work with the best people in the Valley on the coolest new technology, making an incredible new product that's going to change the world. Is that right? Do I have that right? Am I correct? So after my brain finished rebooting, I said, I did decide not to take the job. I have decided not to take the job. And he said, okay. And by the way, you really blew it, because part of the job offer is an IQ test. Are you smart enough to say yes? And you failed. Now, I am in the nerd heart of the universe, backstage at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference, long ago. And I'm right at home because there's thousands of developers cheering and applauding as Apple announces new technologies and new products. They're high on technology. I'm right there with them. The guest speaker was going to be Douglas Adams, a god not just to nerds, but especially to nerds, the creator of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which you may have heard of. And if not, you can read the books, see the TV show, listen to the radio play, see the movie, read the comic book. It's very cool. And I was just hanging out backstage with some friends. I was talking to my friend, Mark B. Johnson, and I was asking, when is the program going to be over so we can maybe go out and get some dinner or something? And they said, well, that depends on Douglas Adams, on how long he speaks for, because nobody really knows. And then suddenly we hear a voice from the corner of the room where we're staying backstage. There's this guy in the corner that nobody knew or thought anything about. And he says, in a voice that sounds like Marvin the Paranoid Android from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he says, oh, I don't think he'll be speaking very long at all. And I look at my friend and he looks at me, and we realize he's been there all along. We didn't know it. We didn't recognize it. And I go up to him. I'm a huge fan. And I say, I'm a huge fan. And I love your work. And you must be really tired of hearing people say that to you. To which he says, thank you. I could never get tired of hearing that. And then I have Douglas Adams all to myself for maybe 5 minutes. And I'm a huge fan of that and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, what would you do if you were a fan of Douglas Adams and you had him for 5 minutes? You probably wouldn't do what I did, which is, why did you choose the number 42 to be so important in the Hitchhiker's Guide story? If you haven't read, watched, or heard the story, you'll know that 42 is really important in the story. And I just felt the need to ask him that. And he took the question right on. And he said, I picked it because it's boring. The 40s are all pretty boring. 41, though, that's too sharp. I wouldn't pick 41. 43 seems like it's hiding something. But 42, it has nothing. It's the most boring number. There's nothing special about it. So when it becomes important in the book, it's very funny. And this made sense to me. I mean, I didn't know whether to believe it or whether he was doing a bit. He was doing a bit. But it was so awesome to get it directly from him. And like as if it had been planned, at that moment, he was called out on stage. So he sort of strode off and did his thing and gave this great speech on stage. Now, unfortunately, we lost Douglas about 10 years after that. But we still have his incredible legacy. And I really think among the things that he did was he changed the world for the number 42. 42 is now a very important number, and no one could ever choose it as being something boring or nondescript, because Douglas Adams changed the world for the number 42. Whatever happened to me moving to Silicon Valley all those years ago? Because I was in love with computers and in love with a computer company. I always knew I wanted to work for a cool computer company. But it turns out I learned I'm not really much of a maker. I'm not that good as a programmer. I don't really know how to design things well. I'm more of a teacher, explainer. When that was not a bad word, I used to say I was an explainer. Communicator. I've been incredibly lucky in my career to work at these world-class companies with amazing people who really have changed the world. Designers, inventors, engineers. And I've been there to explain their work to the world or learn about it or teach it. And that's really what I was meant to do. I learned about storytelling in tech from legendary folks like Andy Hertzfeld and Darren Adler at General Magic, who told me about this tradition of storytelling in tech that's passed down through generations. And I really took that to heart because all these stories kept happening. And the great thing about storytelling is anybody can do it. Everybody has stories. You don't have to tell them on a live stream, but you can. You don't have to get up on a stage, but you can. You can write them down, or you can tell them to your friends or your family. You have stories and you can tell them. And that's what I was supposed to do. I finally figured that out. Not write the software, not design the hardware. Tell the stories. That's all I can do. When I reflect on these stories, I think about one more thing. And that was after I said no to working with Steve Jobs at Next all those years ago. One more thing happened. About a week later, my phone rang late at night, which wasn't something that happens in my house very often. And I said, hello. And the voice said what I already knew. This is Steve Jobs. Is this Scott? And I said, yes. Scott, who works at Apple? I said, yes. And he was different. He was sweet. He was nice. We had a conversation about Next. He still didn't tell me anything about what they were doing, but we spoke, and this was the hero Steve Jobs. This was the good guy Steve Jobs. He was still trying to get me to work there, which I appreciated. And I was still saying no, because once I decided, I decided. And finally he said, I just want to make sure that you don't really want to join us, because we really only get a chance to work on a few things in life. And if you don't work here, I just don't want you to regret it. And I stood by my answer. I said, thank you. I never talk to Steve Jobs again. But now, sometimes I think about this and I wonder, do I regret it? Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Um, wow. Talk about stories. Having stories to tell, and thanks for sharing that um, with us. Now, I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Same if you're watching us on YouTube, I'll keep an eye on the chat there. Um, to get us rolling, I was really fascinated and kind of really charmed, actually, your idea of manuals as spell books. You refer to that as because it is kind of magic, and you had entered a sort of priesthood then as the technical writer. I think speaking as just a guy who's an end user and not really technical. And one question. So you talk about the story of technical writing, and one thing I jotted down here because you talked about how Apple really kind of created this architecture, this design for computers. I haven't heard anyone refer to GUI, graphic user interface, in forever, but that's the reality. That's what we have, and that came from Apple. Um, and I was wondering, did that change the story you wrote when the difference between GUI or I can still kind of remember using DOS or operating systems. What were the is there a difference in the storytelling there for a technical writer?
Sure. Yeah. Anytime, anytime the technology changes, it changes the presentation as it changes how you present it as well as what you present. And when the Mac popularized the graphical user interface, it changed everything, especially for software developers. They had the biggest change. Because before that, the computer sat there blinking at you, waiting for you to do something, right? And the big change, one of the many changes that the Mac and the graphical user interface brought on was now you're in charge. It has to listen when you do something. If you click the mouse, you're in charge, and that was a big change for software developers. I think in the main book for developers was called Inside Macintosh. Caroline Rose called that section "Everything You Know Is Wrong," which she was very spare with the humor, but that was absolutely true. Everything you knew was wrong and had to change. So is that what you were getting at?
Yeah, kind of. Again, not understanding things really in the technical sense. I was just wondering how that affected you, um, as the writer, as the storyteller.
Oh yeah,
Now,
yeah, it definitely. Every technology changes everything in the presentation and what you're presenting.
now we've got a question here from John in the audience. Did you already have a job with Apple when you moved to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I did. I'm not reckless enough, or I'm too careful. Um, Plus, I was married, so
Mm-hmm.
I had interviewed in Silicon Valley, and I got the job at Apple before moving. If I was smart, I would have come here instead of going to college, which I dropped out of, a few years earlier. So, but yep, I already had the job. In fact, Apple helped me relocate. I lived in a place that photo that I have behind me sometimes. This one here. This is when I lived in a place called Apple House, which was in Cupertino, just a block away from the company. Apple owned this, I think it was 5-bedroom, 3-story house, and they jammed as many relocating employees in there as they could, and including me. And there was this hierarchy that depending on how long you've um, been working for the company, that's how good your bedroom was. So there was a gang of folks from Europe who were software localizers, and they lived upstairs in luxury, and I was the new kid on the block, and I was downstairs across from the laundry room that ran day and night. So, and then I also had a roommate, as you can see there are two beds there. So, yep, I already had a job, and then pretty soon I had a better place to live too.
All right. All right. You've got a fan here, Harvey, who says a nice presentation, Scott, some good new material, but I missed some of the other stories you've told previously. So obviously you're sitting on a lot of material here.
There's a lot of stories. Thanks, Harvey.
Um, so Callum here asks, what's the difference between how you approach story in regard to explaining technology versus developing stories like this tonight? That's a good question.
It is a good question. So, in explaining technology, I consider the audience and I want to tell them what they need to know and no more and no less. So, like if I'm telling non-technical users how to do a procedure, I don't want to explain too much, go astray. And if I'm talking to developers, I need to get into more detail. Also, you can be more adult with developers because they're kind of your partners in creating software. So what I mean by that is if there's a bug or the software doesn't work a certain way, tell them. If it's a user, maybe route them around it. Don't waste their time. For storytelling, I will say something that's not literally true if it makes the story better. I feel like if I'm on stage telling a story, I want it to be essentially true. Like I don't want to make up the time, Steve Jobs and I went hang gliding, because that didn't happen. In fact, I think I enjoy my perspective of having only met him one time in my life, and yet having had such an effect on me and so many other people. So I guess that means since storytelling is theater, you can make stuff up, and but I like to be at least hew close to the truth. And then if I'm off stage and somebody says, "Did that really happen?" I'll say, I'll tell the truth.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that's a great storyteller's approach. Now, John has followed up asking, was your first job at Apple a technical writer, and how did you learn to do that?
My first job at Apple, so that's something I didn't exactly follow the truth on. For the purposes of storytelling, my first job at Apple was technical support engineer, where it's the same basic thing. I did writing, but also I helped people, believe it or not, this is so primitive, on the phone, debug their software and learn about their software. Eventually we got email, so that was rocking, but we did phone support as well. And I feel like since I was writing, and since I eventually became a writer most of the time, that I take the shortcut in telling stories that I usually skip that part. So busted. Thanks, John.
Now, Scott Boyd in the audience says, Scott, your story in one of your books about debugging crashes could have been boring, but you used a car, a tree, and a pothole, and I've retold it many times.
Yeah.
Could you share that story with us? I think it may lead into a thought I had while I was watching you.
Sure. So, the problem with debugging a crash, especially back when I wrote that, back in that day, if your program froze or crashed, you didn't know why, and you couldn't really look because you couldn't rewind it. All you had was the crash. And so the metaphor was a car crashed into a tree. Why did it crash into a tree? And at the time there was no telemetry, there was no console or recording. And, now, imagine now when the Tesla crashes into a tree, you know a lot about how it got to the tree. Back then we didn't know. And I think Chris Espinosa came up with that, Apple employee number 8. And I stole that from him, but hopefully I credit him in the book. But if not, I'll take credit. So thanks, uh, thanks for that, Scott. Yeah, I like that metaphor too. That's why I stole
And I have memories about I guess like the Mac Plus when I was in college and graduate school, and when the bomb symbol would come up, the dreaded bomb, which is in itself a story. It's telling a story, kind of along the lines of what you're saying here. It's happened, and certainly us, we users sure didn't know why, but it sure taught us to save often.
it. Yeah, there's an interesting fact about the bomb that um, Andy Hertzfeld told me that it wasn't users were never supposed to see that.
Hmm.
It was supposed to be, I don't know, debugged out or just something that developers would see, and that didn't happen. It turned into a thing that users did see. And another fact about that is that a lot of things in the Mac used to have a four-letter code to define them. Um, like a dialogue was DLOG and a menu was MENU. Uh, if I recall correctly, the bomb box was a was DSAT, which we explained in the documentation stood for Dire Straits Alert Table. And Dire Straits, DS didn't really stand for Dire Straits. It stood for Deep Shit Alert Table. But, it wasn't supposed to go out. So I'm not
um,
sure Apple ever publicly admitted that that's what it stood for, but everybody knew.
it's a good story either way. I'm liking it both ways. Um, Callum asks, we've seen various versions of this over the years, and great job, Scott. Wondering if you'd share about the difference of your experience tonight sharing it in Zoom, theater versus live, Zoom theater live versus live in person.
Oh, you can't beat a live stage with live people. I'm really grateful that this exists, but I think we all know that we miss that. Just the entire rush, the being being scared, well, excited and scared to get out on a stage. Um, there's nothing quite like it. I've actually been around a lot with what's the right form to present these stories, because they started as blog posts, and
Mm-hmm.
then I kind of got into the stage and decided to make it. And I saw that this exists. I saw like Kate Robards, who's
Mm-hmm.
performed at the Marsh, um, inspired me and encouraged me to do it live on a stage, um, and so I have. But I'm not sure. Like, is it a stage show? Is it blog posts? Should I put them all in a book? Why not all? There's only 24 hours a day. I have a full-time job. So so I do like the getting out on the stage, though. That's pretty cool. It's an out of body experience for me.
I think there's something really fun about seeing this. You talk about these things technical, um, live and in person, and I don't know. I've just kind of gotten used to this a little bit. This still feels pretty live. I'd rather we were in the marsh with you on stage, but this ain't bad either.
No, this is really great. The only regret I have is that I don't work for Zoom. Like I work for a company that makes a rival to Zoom, and so I'm like, oh, Zoom took over the world. Oh no. But yeah, Zoom is pretty great. It's pretty great to that this exists and to do it this way. And I mean, I always wanted everybody to move forward technically, and so didn't want it to happen this way. But it's great that we have this, and I really appreciate the Marsh doing this, by the way.
Now, Nicole says, I enjoyed the way you wove together your experience along with the history of not only Apple but Silicon Valley as a whole. What do you say to newer generations that don't understand the history of the icons on buttons such as save?
uh, yeah, that's something I've spent a bit of time talking about. I think what I say is the designers need to be smarter about like I remember there is an icon that looks like a floppy disk that means save, and they asked some um, younger folks what it is, and one person said it's a soda machine with a bottle of soda, which it absolutely looks like. So no, the real answer to that is no more save icon. It should just save for you. I mean, what software is there that you have to click save? We don't want that anymore. So that's my answer to that one. But yeah, people need to be careful with their designs of icons because there's a lot of anachronisms now.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, I work with a lot of younger people, and I still hear people saying "stay tuned," and which is kind of an old TV. I mean, it's still current, but as a person very interested in words, I try to have a very careful ear to listen to what is still used and what's not, and I try to keep up. That doesn't mean I try to use the current slang because that doesn't work for someone of my vintage, but I do try to not use phrases that went out 30 years ago. So
Um, you talked about, the car crash comparison to a computer crash, and then at some point in the show you had said how, my brain finished rebooting. Um, and and I know I'm constantly kind of referring to things like it's like, oh, my brain RAM is full or something. Um, I mean, and do you think of your own mind or the way the mind works kind of in these technical terms with this behind the scenes look? And is it kind of are your metaphors kind of still, I don't know, 1990s or 1980s metaphors, or have they moved forward?
I try not to.
Okay.
One exception is I often wish for an undo button. Like, I ate something that wasn't right and I wish I could undo that. Or I went somewhere I shouldn't have gone and I need an undo or a rewind. And, no, I actually don't. Um, one thing I think about a lot is the way one of the metaphors we used to talk about way back when was we want computers to be as easy to use as your TV. Just turn it on and use it. And now your TV is as hard to use as your computer. We kind of went backwards. We weren't supposed to do it that way. Like my TV is getting a software update. Should not have been a thing. My TV is rebooting. Should not have been a thing. My watch reboots. That's that's weird.
Yeah. Um, so there's a question here. On that. We're getting a lot of really interesting comments and questions, so I got to back up here. From Matthew. Matthew writes, April asks, what's the difference between doing a one-person show like this versus a scripted multi-person show? You've done multi-person work?
Yeah, I like to do musical theater,
Oh, great.
especially.
Yeah.
And one of the differences is the support. Like tonight, it's me and you and Brianna, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the show, um, and I appreciate the support. But doing musical theater, there's a cast and
Mhm.
a crew and a director and a technical director and costuming and lighting and makeup and all these people to support and help you, and that's awesome. I love that and I miss that. And um, I mean, I did my own lighting. I don't like to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
and so that's like one technical sort of difference, but that translates into camaraderie too.
Yeah.
Um, doing a show, you go to rehearsal every night for weeks, and you become really close with the cast and the crew, and so that's really different. Uh, if you do a solo show, um, you have to do it or get somebody else to do it. My family helps, and but mostly, I mean, they help if I ask them to. It's still incumbent on me. And whereas a big show or a play or a musical is a lot of people working together, and that's pretty cool. On the
Yeah.
other hand, if I want to change something, I don't have to ask anybody's permission.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Sarah's written that this definitely takes me back to growing up in Saratoga and Cupertino in the 70s and 80s. Thanks for sparking all the memories of playing games on our Mac 2 and Lisa back in the day. Um, and we got two questions here, which I think are a good place for us to wrap up. Kathleen notes you wrote one story for Andy Hertzfeld's folklore.org. Have you considered adding more stories there?
Well, plug for folklore.org. If you want to lose a day to great stories about Silicon Valley, check it out.
Nice.
It's an amazing place. I I wrote I wrote a Steve Jobs encounter story there, and for the period that folklore.org covers, which is the time around the creation of the Mac, I don't really have a lot of stories because I didn't get to Apple until right after the Mac came out. So I don't know that I would really have another story to put there. Um, but I love reading and rereading those stories. And there was a book also, Andy turned it into a book called, I think it's called Revolution in the Valley, which I'm sure you can get, but you can also read the stories at the website.
No, I'd love to check that out. That sounds great.
It's excellent.
And Nicole has a question here. I think this is a great closeout question. Nicole says, thank you also for sharing about your meeting with Douglas Adams. I have wondered how he came up with the number 42. Now, is that story true?
Okay, the story I told is true.
Okay.
that all happened pretty much exactly like that. The story he told me, I don't know.
I mean, he was Douglas Adams after all, so who knows? But it's a great story.
Yeah,
and thanks for sharing that.
Talk about master storyteller.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I will say to the audience here that we will have this archived on our YouTube channel. It'll take a little time to process and stuff. It'll depend a little bit on the YouTube servers, how quick it goes up, but it should be up by about lunchtime tomorrow. So if you have friends who would enjoy this who couldn't be here tonight, please share it with them. Scott, thank you very much for sharing all this with us and for being part of the MarshStream. We're really glad to have you. If you can support us with a donation, the tip charge link is in the chat. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you, Scott.
David, thank you for the opportunity. I love doing it. And thanks to everybody who showed up out there in Zoomville. And see you again.
Everyone take care and good night to y'all.
Good night.
To the doctor when you're sick. Your mother.
Good morning, New York. Buenos dias. It's me. What's up?
We went out for lunch at a sushi place where she tried sushi for the first time and she liked it.
I see that change can happen. I know things can shift and change for good.
I am dizzily dazzled with stars in my eyes.
Same level as I broke my neck. But he's not getting the same return of function I am.
And I don't want any of your smart aleck sex talk that I usually get when I get...
This is beyond the marsh because what you're doing is planting beautiful seeds for artists to grow.